Hey guys, so today we are going to review the distance and midpoint formulas, and then we are going to talk about circles. So the first thing we're looking at is the distance formula. We've got it right here for us. It is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So example 1 says find the distance between these 2 points. So I'm going to label this first point as my x1, y1. This second point is going to be my x2, y2, and then I just plug them into that formula and simplify. So I'm going to start with the distance is equal to and that big square root, and then parentheses squared and another parentheses squared. The first parentheses is x2 minus x1, so that would be my 7 minus my 2. And then the second parentheses is y2 minus y1. So that would be 9 minus my 3. Be careful that you're keeping these straight when you are looking at your points. So since we started with that 7 for our x2, we got to make sure that in our second parentheses we start with that 9 for our y2. We got to make sure everything lines up properly. And then I'm just going to simplify from here. So 7 minus 2 is 5 squared. 9 minus 3 is 6 squared. 5 squared is 25. 6 squared is 36. And 25 plus 36 means we have the square root of 61. So the distance between those two is the square root of 61. That 61 can't be simplified. We can't break down that square root, so that's our answer. The distance between those 2 points is the square root of 61. Next, we're going to look at the midpoint formula. So our midpoint formula, we've got x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2, and they make our ordered pair for that midpoint. So same thing, I'm going to label my first point as x1, y1, my second point as x2, y2. It doesn't really matter which way you label them, by the way. The first one could be your x2, y2 if you really wanted it to. Just as long as you make sure you keep it straight, it doesn't matter which way you label it. So I know I'm going to have an ordered pair, and for both parts, I'm going to divide by 2. And then the top of the first one is x1 plus x2. So that's going to be my negative 5 plus my 5. Then the next one in my y spot is my y1 plus y2. So my negative 6 plus my 8. Okay, when I start to simplify this, negative 5 plus 5 is going to give me 0 over 2. Negative 6 plus 8 is going to give me 2 over 2, which simplifies down to 0 and 1. 0 divided by 2 is 0, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So my midpoint in between those 2 points would be 0, 1. Now, these two formulas can be helpful when we're looking at circles, which is our main focus for today. So right here, we've got the standard form of a circle. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. The h and k make up your center. So that's where our midpoint formula could possibly be helpful if we need to find the center of the circle and we know like 2 points that are exactly across each other from the circle. And it's equaled to r squared, where r is your radius, and that's where the distance formula could be helpful. Maybe we need to figure out what that radius is using that distance formula. So that's kind of why we reviewed those two formulas. So let's look at some problems. The first one right here says if the diameter of a circle is 10 and the center is at 3, negative 6, what is the equation of the circle? Now, make sure that you are reading these very, very carefully because you'll look and see that this says diameter, but when we're talking about our equation, we need radius, not diameter. So instead of using 10, my radius is half of my diameter, so my radius should be 5. And then it does give me my center, my h, and my k. So I have all the information that I need, but I just have to make sure I'm paying attention that it said diameter and not radius. So I know not to use 10, but I need to use 5. And then I can just plug it all into my equation. So using my h and my k, I'm going to have x minus h, so x minus 3 squared, plus y minus k. So y minus -6 really means y plus 6 squared, minus the negative becomes plus. And it's going to equal my radius squared, which is my 5 squared. Now we don't leave it as 5 squared, we do need to actually go ahead and simplify that. So I'm going to get x minus 3 squared plus y plus 6 squared equals, and instead of 5 squared, it's going to equal 25. And that would be my equation for my circle. Okay, example 4 says write the equation from the graph. So we're given a graph and now we need to write the equation based on the graph. So remember, for our equation, we need our center and we need our radius. And if you look, they have our center very nicely drawn for us. Our center is at 4, 3. So that's my h and my k. And then to find my radius, I just need to count. I can count up, I can count to the left, I could count to the right, or I could count down. Any way you go, you should get that the radius is 2. And then I just plug it into my equation. So x minus h means x minus 4 squared plus y minus k, so y minus 3 squared, and it's going to equal my r squared, so 2 squared. And then I can't leave it as 2 squared, I do need to actually square that, so x minus 4 squared plus my y minus 3 squared is going to equal, instead of 2 squared, 4. And there's the equation. So those were not too bad. Let's step it up a little bit, make it just a little more complicated. Example 5, it says find the equation of the circle with a center of -4, 5 if we know 1, 7 is also a point on the circle. So I'm going to draw a picture to kind of help us out a little bit. Here's my circle, and here's my center. And I do know that my center is -4, 5. So I'm going to go ahead and label that -4, 5. And then it tells me that another point on the circle is 1, 7. So I'm going to put that, let's say here, 1, 7. Now remember, for my equation, I need to know the center and I need to know the radius. But I don't know what the radius is. This is where, like I was saying, we could use one of our other formulas. We could use our distance formula here to help us. From the center to that point on the circle is the radius, so I just need to find that distance. So I'm going to use my distance formula. Let's say my center is my x1, y1. My other point is my x2, y2. And I'm going to plug it in to my distance formula. So remember, I'm going to say r equals instead of d equals. R equals that big square root, and it's x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So I just need to plug it all in and see what my radius is. So the big square root, my x2 is 1 minus my x1. So if I have a minus a -4, that's going to be plus 4 squared. Plus, then y2 is 7 minus y1 is 5 squared. So 1 plus 4 is 5. 7 minus 5 is 2. So if I have 5 squared, that's going to be 25. 2 squared is 4. So my radius is going to be the square root of 25 plus 4, which is 29. So now I know what my center is, I know what my radius is, and I can plug it all into my equation. So x minus h would be x, instead of minus a -4, we're going to do plus 4 squared, plus my y minus my k, so y minus 5 squared, and it's going to equal my radius, the square root of 29 squared. And remember, we don't leave it like that. We do need to simplify it. But for this one, when I simplify it, that square root and squared are going to cancel out. And so I'm just going to be left with 29. So x plus 4 squared plus y minus 5 squared is just going to equal 29. And there's my equation. And let's step it up even just a little bit more. Example 6 says, given this equation, x squared plus 16x plus y squared minus 14y minus 200 equals 0, complete the square to find the standard form of the circle, also known as center radius form. So what we've been working with is our standard form or center radius form of a circle, and we need to take this equation and put it in that form. And we're going to complete the square to help us do that. So remember, the first part of completing the square is to get anything that does not have a variable, so any constant, to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to add that 200 over, and then we're going to have to complete the square with the x's, so the x squared plus 16x, and we're going to have to complete the square with the y's, the y squared minus 14y. So I'm going to have x squared plus 16x, and I'm going to do plus a blank for completing the square there. Then I'm going to have the y squared minus 14y plus a blank for completing the square there. And then it's going to equal the 200. And then remember, I've got to have a blank for completing the square with the x's and a blank for completing the square with the y's on the other side of the equation to balance out what I'm adding on the left side. I can't just add something to one side of the equation. I've got to add it to both sides and balance my equation out. So what goes in that blank is my b over 2 squared. So for my x's, b is 16. So 16 over 2 would be 8. And if I square that, I get 64. So I'm going to put a 64 in both of those blanks for completing the square with the x's. For my y's, if I have negative 14 over 2 squared, that would be negative 7 squared, which is 49. Now remember, when we're factoring these, the whole point is to get them to factor in a very specific way, which is how our standard form or center radius form of the circle looks. So you could do your big X to help you factor, or you can remember the shortcut that we talked about, that whatever your b over 2 is, that's going to be what fills in your factor. So for the x's, b over 2 is 8, so it's going to be x plus 8. And that fills in over here. For my y's, I had negative 7, so for my y's, it's going to be y minus 7. That fills in. And then on the right side, I just add it all together. So 200 plus 64 plus 49 is going to get me 313. And there's my equation. X plus 8 squared plus y minus 7 squared equals 313. And that's it for circles. So you guys make sure you get started on your assignment that goes with this. Let me know if you have any questions, and you guys have a good day.